Current federal legislation governing traceability activities in Canada is the Health of Animals Act. Under the Health of Animal regulations, the Animal ID program for cattle and bison has been in place since 2001, which has been amended to include sheep identification in 2004. Canadian Cattle Identification Agency is the national administrator of the Animal ID program for cattle, bison, and sheep. CFIA collects and stores animal identification and limited movement information for most provinces in its national database. A unique identification number of each animal is maintained throughout its life until the animal is slaughtered at an abattoir or exported. Additional regulatory requirements include the following events which must be reported to the administrator: the manufacturing, sale, and distribution of approved tags, the replacement of lost and damaged tags, the slaughter of an animal bearing an approved tag or the receipt of its carcass, the import and export of animals. It is also prohibited to send, transport, and receive animals not bearing an approved tag unless otherwise specified in the regulations, and that would include delivery to a tagging station where prior arrangements were made to have those animals tagged at that point. CFIA enforces requirements under the authority of the Health of Animal regulations. The H of A regulations prescribe additional responsibilities for the custodians of animals: humane treatment, transport, etc. Three pillars of traceability: animal ID. The program involves the individual identification of all cattle, bison, and sheep that move beyond their herd of origin or premise of origin, with approved ear tags bearing numbers that are unique to each animal. Cattle, mandatory RFID since July 1st, 2010. All previously approved barcode tags for cattle have been delisted. Custodians of cattle must not remove revoked barcode tags, it was a previously approved tag, on application of an approved RFID tag. Bison, one tag, a barcode, or an RFID tag. Sheep, one tag, a barcode tag, a metal curl lock tag, a data set, or an RFID tag. Premise identification. At present, no federal authority to require premise identification. Traceability data provides the name and addresses of persons who purchase or retire tags. There's a need for better geographical representation as supported by veterinarians and epidemiologists, or the individuals that trace it out. Some provinces have mandatory or voluntary premise ID, but the approach for implementation varies. Movement reporting is essential to a traceability system. Limited movement reporting requirements, reporting of last movement to report retirement of tags currently in place for some species. In Quebec, change of ownership and movement beyond 10 kilometers is reported to the ATQ database. Requirements for auction marts. All animals received at an auction must be identified with an approved tag unless the auction is an approved tagging station and prior arrangements were made. This does not apply for sheep. There's indication that the animals lost their approved tags during transport. The auction operator must apply an approved tag to an animal if it does not already bear one. The auction operator must ensure that all animals are properly identified with an approved tag when presented for sale in the auction ring. The approved tag applied must be for the species of animal it's being applied to. The approved tag must be applied to the ear of the animal with the logo and the number facing forward. All animals and carcasses leaving the auction must be identified with an approved tag. If auction is an approved tagging station must be identified as such in the administrator database. Auctions must report within 30 days of application of a new approved tag the number of new tags to the administrator and correlate the new tag with the old tag where possible. Record keeping requirements. Auctions must also keep records including the names and addresses of the consignor, of every animal received, and the purchaser of every animal sold. For each animal or carcass to which a new approved tag has been applied by the auction operator, a record containing the number of the new approved tag, information about the animal or carcass to enable the origin to be traced, the name and address of the previous owner or custodian of animal or carcass prior to the place where the new approved tag was attached to it, the date when it was brought to that place, and the new identification of conveyance that brought the animal or carcass to the place where the new approved tag was attached to it. Record for all animals identified with an approved tag and which died on site, including identification number of the approved tags and date at which the animal died. Key gaps in the current framework: lack of consistent and detailed identification across Canada of locations where animals are kept, assembled, or disposed of. Lack of knowledge of the location of non-commercial operations. Those are activities that do not include commerce, production for their own use. Non-identification of some highly susceptible species, example pigs. Lack of information reporting on animal movement and commingling. Lack of information reporting on the identification of conveyances that transport animals. Addressing gaps. In 2006, federal, provincial, territorial ag ministers committed to move forward on a comprehensive national traceability system for livestock and poultry. In 2009, the commitment was strengthened to have in place mandatory comprehensive national system for livestock and poultry by 2011, and that implementation will be supported by national funding and regulatory framework. CFIA is working to meet the 2011 deadline to develop a proposal for a new legislative framework for implementing farm-to-slaughter traceability for priority livestock: cattle, sheep, hogs, poultry. Concurrently, CFIA is continuing with amendments to regulations under the Health of Animals Act to achieve elements of traceability for priority species. There's a proposed amendment to establish a mandatory pig identification traceability system. The key elements of the proposed new framework are animal ID, premise ID, movement and event reporting, and information management. Animal ID. Animal identification requirements for cattle, bison, and sheep exist under the Health of Animal regulations. Proposed framework will provide new enabling authority, enhanced authority to identify animals, and provide authority for reporting their location and movement along the farm to slaughter continuum. Ability to determine attributes such as date of birth or age through an ID number. The new framework will enhance existing authorities for animal ID. Proposed premise ID. Proposed federal approach will require regulated parties to identify their premise through existing mandatory provincial systems, Alberta and Quebec, voluntary provincial systems in Ontario, alternate means. Provinces will have a flexibility in their approach to it. Provinces are committed to developing and verifying premise. Although framework will be national in scope, it will permit utilization of existing provincial regulations governing